gavel hadn't even fallen yet, but Karoline Leavitt already knew this wouldn't be a fair fight. Judge Leonard Baxter's smirk told her everything she needed to know. Somewhere in the packed gallery of the Hamilton County Courthouse in Cincinnati, a journalist whispered into a recorder, "She's got a bombshell." But will he let her drop it? The question hung in the air, sharp and unanswered, as Karoline, the current White House press secretary, stepped forward to face a legal storm that could unravel her career or someone else's. Karoline, at 27, carried the weight of her title with a steely resolve forged in the fires of New Hampshire politics, Trump's campaign trail, and her time as communications director for Elise Stefanik. Today, she wasn't just a mouthpiece for the administration. She was a plaintiff, dragging Baxter into court over accusations of abuse of power and political bias. The case stemmed from a speech she'd given, official, sanctioned, and, according to her, illegally censored by Baxter's ruling. The room buzzed with reporters, political analysts, and onlookers, their eyes darting between her and the man on the bench who held her fate in his gnarled hands. Baxter didn't waste a second. "Ms. Leavitt," he drawled, his voice thick with condescension, "I assume the White House has better things to do than send its little spokesperson to waste my time." The gallery rippled with stifled laughter, a few heads nodding as if they'd expected this. Karoline's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. She'd faced worse: television pundits calling her a prop, The View sniping that she'd been hired for her looks instead of her brain. This wasn't new, but it still stung. "Your Honor," she replied, her tone even, "I'm here because no one, not even a judge, gets to silence free speech without consequences." The words landed like a gauntlet thrown at his feet, and for a moment the air in the courtroom thickened, heavy as a blade poised to strike. Baxter's eyes narrowed, the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth betraying his irritation. He leaned forward, his robe shifting like a shadow over the bench, and flipped open a file with exaggerated slowness. "Free speech," he mocked, dragging the phrase out like it tasted sour. "That's a bold claim from someone who spends her days spinning tales for the press. Tell me, Miss Leavitt, do you think this courtroom is your personal stage?" More chuckles from the crowd, louder this time. A reporter scribbled furiously, the scratch of pen on paper cutting through the tension. Karoline clasped her hands on the table, her knuckles whitening. She'd known Baxter's reputation, hard-nosed, unapologetic, with a well-documented disdain for conservatives, but this was personal, and he wasn't even pretending to hide it. "I'm not here to perform," she shot back, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "I'm here because you overstepped your authority and buried a ruling that should have protected my rights, not to mention the public's." The accusation hung there, raw and unfiltered, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Baxter didn't blink, but something dark flickered in his gaze. He was a man who thrived on control, who'd built his career bending the law to fit his biases, and Karoline had just called him out in front of a live audience. He snorted, a sound that grated like nails on a chalkboard. "Rights? You're a kid playing dress-up in a big job, Ms. Leavitt. I've seen your type. Young, loud, thinking you can waltz in here and lecture me because you got a fancy title." He paused, letting the insult sink in, then added, "Maybe if you spent less time posing for cameras, you'd understand how a courtroom actually works." The gallery erupted, some laughing outright, others murmuring in agreement. A woman in the back hissed, "She's out of her league," loud enough for Karoline to hear. Her attorney, Michael Hensley, shifted beside her, his hand brushing her arm in a silent warning, "Don't take the bait." But Karoline didn't need coddling. She'd stood toe-to-toe with political sharks and come out unscathed. Baxter wasn't going to break her with cheap shots. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she said, her words laced with ice, "I don't need a law degree to know when a judge twists the rules to fit his agenda. And I've got the evidence to prove it." The room went still. Baxter's smirk faltered, just for a split second before he recovered with a scoff. "Evidence? Oh, this I've got to hear. Go on, Miss Leavitt, enlighten us. Let's see if your little White House podium tricks hold up here." He leaned back, arms crossed, daring her to step into his trap. The crowd leaned in, eager for the kill. Or the comeback. Karoline met his stare head-on, her pulse hammering but her face a mask of calm. She'd known this would be a fight, but Baxter's arrogance was a gift. He was already underestimating her. "Careful what you wish for," she said softly, almost too soft to hear, but the promise in her voice sent a shiver through the room. Baxter wanted a spectacle? Fine. She'd give him one he wouldn't walk away from. The reporters in the back stopped writing, pens hovering as if sensing the shift. Whatever came next, it wasn't going to be pretty. And Karoline was ready to make sure of it. Karoline Leavitt barely got 3 words into her opening statement before Judge Leonard Baxter's gavel slammed down, the crack slicing through her sentence like a guillotine. "Enough," he snapped, his voice booming with authority. "Ms. Leavitt, if you think you can ramble on like you're briefing a press room, you're sorely mistaken. This is my courtroom, not your White House circus." The gallery buzzed, a mix of snickers and murmurs rippling through the crowd. Karoline's fingers tightened around her notes, but she kept her eyes locked on Baxter. "Your Honor," she said, her tone measured, "I'm here to present a case, not to entertain you. If you'd let me finish—" "Let you finish?" Baxter cut in, his lips curling into a sneer. "Oh, I'd love to, but I'm not in the mood to hear a little girl play lawyer today. You're a press secretary, Ms. Leavitt, a mouthpiece, not a litigator. Why don't you stick to what you're good at and leave the law to the grown-ups?" The laughter from the audience hit her like a slap, sharp and humiliating. A man in the back muttered, "She's just fishing for headlines," loud enough to sting. Karoline's attorney, Michael Hensley, shot to his feet. "Your Honor, my client has every right to speak. This is a blatant violation of—" "Sit down, Hensley," Baxter barked, his glare pinning the lawyer like a bug under glass. "One more outburst, and I'll have you removed. I don't need your lectures either." Michael hesitated, then sank back into his seat, his jaw clenched. Karoline shot him a quick glance. Stay calm, but inside her blood was boiling. Baxter wasn't just dismissing her, he was dismantling her, piece by piece, in front of everyone. "You want to talk rights?" Baxter continued, leaning forward, his voice dripping with mockery. "Fine, let's talk about this so-called case of yours. You're claiming I censored your precious speech, some grand diatribe you spouted off as the White House's darling. Tell me, Ms. Leavitt, is this lawsuit just another stunt to polish your image? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a cheap PR trick from a kid who's in over her head." The accusation landed hard and the crowd ate it up. A woman hissed, "She's wasting our time," while a reporter scribbled furiously, the sound grating on Karoline's nerves. "It's not a stunt," she fired back, her voice rising despite her effort to keep it steady. "It's about accountability. You blocked a speech that was cleared by my office, and you did it because you didn't like who I worked for. That's not justice. That's bias." Baxter chuckled, a low, guttural sound that made her skin crawl. "Bias? Oh, that's rich coming from you. You're a walking billboard for your party, Ms. Leavitt. Don't pretend you're here for some noble cause. You're here because you couldn't handle a little pushback on your soapbox." He waved a hand dismissively. "Go cry about it to your press corps." "I'm not buying it." The gallery erupted again, laughter mixing with whispers of agreement. Karoline felt the weight of their judgment pressing down, isolating her in a sea of hostility. She opened her mouth to respond, but Baxter wasn't done. "And speaking of crying," he said, his tone shifting to something darker, "let's talk about this." He slid a single sheet of paper across his bench, holding it up for the room to see. "An email, ladies and gentlemen, straight from Miss Leavitt's White House account. Shall I read it?" Karoline froze, her breath catching. She knew what was coming. She'd written that email months ago, late at night, after a brutal day of dodging questions about judicial overreach. It was private, raw, never meant for anyone's eyes. "That's not relevant," she started, but Baxter steamrolled over her. "The courts are a joke," he read aloud, his voice dripping with glee. "They twist everything to fit their politics. It's why we're losing. Sound familiar, Ms. Leavitt?" He tossed the paper down, smirking. "This is what you really think of us, isn't it? And now you've got the nerve to stand here whining about your rights. You don't respect this system. You despise it." The room exploded. "Hypocrite!" someone shouted from the back. Another voice chimed in, "She's done!" Reporters scrambled to capture every word, their pens moving like vultures picking at a carcass. Karoline's face burned, but she forced herself to speak. "That email was private," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "It was leaked illegally, and you know it. Using it here is a cheap shot." "Cheap?" Baxter shot back, his eyes glinting with malice. "No, Ms. Leavitt. What's cheap is you thinking you can waltz in here and play victim after trashing the very institution you're begging to save you. You're not a plaintiff. You're a fraud." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "Go ahead, try to explain that away. I dare you." The crowd jeered, their voices a wall of disdain. Karoline's hands trembled, but she clenched them into fists. "I wrote that email because I've seen judges like you," she said, her words sharp as knives. "Judges who think they're above the law, who bury the truth when it doesn't suit them. That's why I'm here, to stop you." Baxter's smirk vanished, replaced by a scowl. "Watch your tongue," he hissed. "You're treading on thin ice, Ms. Leavitt. Keep it up and I'll hold you in contempt faster than you can say press conference." He pointed a finger at her, his voice low and venomous. "You're nothing but a loudmouth with a title. Prove me wrong, if you can." The challenge hung between them, electric and suffocating. Michael leaned in, whispering, "Karoline, don't," but she ignored him. Baxter had her pinned, humiliated, and the crowd was lapping it up. She was on the ropes, and he knew it. But Karoline wasn't done, not yet. "You want proof?" she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "You'll get it, and when you do, you'll wish you'd kept your mouth shut." Baxter laughed, but it was forced, hollow. "Big words," he sneered. "Let's see if you've got anything to back them up or if you're just bluffing like always." The gallery leaned forward, hungry for more, as Karoline stared him down, her resolve hardening. She was cornered, but she wasn't broken. Not yet. Karoline Leavitt stood at the plaintiff's table, the weight of Baxter's taunts and the gallery's jeers pressing down like a vice, but she didn't waver. Every eye in the Hamilton County Courthouse was on her, waiting for her to crack. Judge Leonard Baxter loomed over the bench, his smirk daring her to keep swinging. She took a breath, reached into her folder, and pulled out a small USB drive. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the din like a blade. "I'd like to submit evidence, a recording that proves you've got no business sitting up there." The room went silent, the air crackling with anticipation. Baxter's eyes flicked to the drive, his smirk twitching. "A recording?" he scoffed, his tone dripping with disdain. "What's this, Miss Leavitt? Some doctored audio from your White House spin factory? I'm not here for your games." "It's not a game," Karoline shot back, holding the drive up for all to see. "It's a statement from a former clerk of yours, taped 5 years ago. She says you twisted a ruling, same kind of case as mine, because a lobbying group leaned on you. You threatened her to keep quiet. Care to explain that?" The words landed like a grenade, and the gallery gasped, a few heads whipping toward Baxter. He slammed his gavel down, the bang echoing like a gunshot. "That's preposterous," he roared, his face reddening. "You're fabricating evidence now. I'll have that thrown out and you cited for contempt." The gavel hit again and again, each strike a desperate bid to drown her out. But Karoline didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her voice rising. "Play it, Your Honor. Let the court hear it. Or are you afraid of what's on there?" "Afraid?" Baxter spat, his eyes blazing. "You're a liar, Ms. Leavitt. A desperate little liar grasping at straws. That's no evidence. It's a stunt." He pointed the gavel at her like a weapon. "Sit down before I have you hauled out of here." The crowd stirred, some shouting, "Play it!" while others yelled, "She's bluffing!" Michael Hensley jumped up beside Karoline. "Your Honor, my client has the right to present this. You can't just—" Baxter cut him off with a snarl. "I can, Hensley. And I will. One more word, and you're both gone." Michael froze, but Karoline pressed on, undeterred. "You can't deny it's real, can you?" she said, her voice steady, each word a hammer blow. "You can't deny you rigged that case, can you? You can't deny you bullied that clerk into silence, can you?" The repetition sliced through Baxter's bluster, pinning him in place. His hands shook, the gavel hovering mid-air, but he didn't answer. The gallery leaned in, the tension thick enough to choke on. "Enough!" Baxter bellowed, slamming the gavel so hard it nearly splintered. "I won't let you turn my courtroom into a circus. That recording's fake, and I'll prove it." He jabbed a finger at the bailiff. "Get that thing and destroy it, now!" The bailiff hesitated, glancing between Baxter and Karoline, but before he could move, a new voice broke the chaos. "Wait!" Emily Carter, Baxter's assistant, stood up from her seat behind the bench, her face pale but resolute. The room turned as one, stunned. "It's not fake," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I was there, I heard him say it, and I'm the one who leaked her email." A collective gasp ripped through the crowd, followed by shouts of "What?" and "Traitor!" Karoline's eyes widened, but she held her ground. Baxter wheeled on Emily, his face contorting with fury. "You're lying!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "You backstabbing little... Sit down or I'll ruin you!" Emily flinched but didn't budge. "You told me to dig up dirt on her," she said, pointing at Karoline. "You wanted that email to shut her up. I did it to keep my job, but I can't anymore." The courtroom erupted. "Justice!" someone yelled from the back, while another voice countered, "She's in on it." Reporters scrambled, phones raised, capturing every second. Baxter's composure shattered, his hands gripping the bench as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. "You're finished, Carter," he snarled, then turned to Karoline. "And you? This is a setup. You planned this." "Did I?" Karoline fired back, her voice ice cold. "Or did you dig your own grave 5 years ago? You can't squirm out of this one, Your Honor. The truth's out, and it's loud." She tapped the USB drive against the table, the tiny clink a death knell in the chaos. Baxter's eyes darted to it, then to Emily, then to the roaring crowd, his control slipping through his fingers like sand. "Order!" he shouted, pounding the gavel again, but it was useless. The room was a powder keg, and Emily's betrayal had lit the fuse. "I'll have you all in contempt," he raged, his voice hoarse. "This is my court." But the words sounded hollow, desperate. A woman in the gallery screamed, "Not anymore," and the chant spread, a wave of defiance crashing over him. Karoline watched him unravel, her pulse racing but her face a mask of steel. "You wanted proof?" she said, her voice cutting through the uproar. "Here it is. You can't deny it's your voice on that tape, can you? You can't deny you sold out the law, can you?" Baxter's mouth opened then closed, his silence deafening. The crowd surged, some cheering, others cursing, as Emily sank back into her chair, tears streaming down her face. Baxter's glare locked on Karoline, pure hatred burning in his eyes. "You'll pay for this," he hissed, barely audible over the chaos. "You and your little rat over there." He jabbed a finger at Emily, who shrank under the weight of his wrath. The bailiff finally moved, unsure whether to grab the drive or restrain the judge himself. Karoline didn't blink. "We'll see who pays," she said, her words a promise and a threat. The room spun out of control, voices clashing, fists pounding on seats. Baxter's reign was cracking, and Karoline had struck the blow, but the fallout was only beginning. Emily's confession had turned ally against ally, and the truth, now loose, was a beast neither side could tame. Judge Leonard Baxter's hand trembled as he raised the gavel, his voice hoarse but defiant. "This court is in recess," he bellowed, slamming it down with a crack that barely cut through the uproar. The gallery was already a mess, shouts, jeers, and the clatter of reporters' devices drowning out his command. He shoved back from the bench, robe flapping, clearly aiming to bolt, but the side door swung open before he could escape. A group of federal investigators strode in, led by Jennifer Brooks, a no-nonsense woman in a crisp suit, her badge glinting under the lights. "Judge Baxter," Jennifer called, her tone sharp enough to halt him mid-step. "You're not going anywhere. We've been watching you for months. Corruption allegations, backroom deals. Step down. We need to talk." The room froze for a split second, then exploded again, voices clashing like thunder. Baxter spun around, his face a mask of fury. "You've got no jurisdiction here," he snapped, jabbing a finger at her. "This is my courtroom, Brooks. You don't get to waltz in and bark orders." His words dripped with venom, but Jennifer didn't blink. "We do when the evidence piles up," she shot back. "Step down or we'll make you..." Karoline Leavitt stood firm at the plaintiff's table, her pulse racing as the scene unraveled. The crowd split in real time. Right-wing reporters in the back started chanting, "Karoline, Karoline!" Their voices a lifeline, tying back to her White House press secretary role and its conservative base. But another faction hissed, "She's a fraud, and lock her up," turning the room into a battlefield. Michael Hensley grabbed her arm. "We need to get out. Now," he urged, but Karoline shook him off. "I'm not running from the truth," she said, loud enough for Baxter to hear. She locked eyes with him, her voice steady. "You're done, Your Honor. The feds don't show up for nothing." Baxter's glare could have melted steel. "Done?" he snarled, stepping toward her, despite Jennifer's team closing in. "You think this saves you, Leavitt? You're a dead woman walking. I'll sue you for slander, drag you through every court in this country, till you're begging for mercy." His threat hung heavy, even as two agents flanked him, their hands hovering near his arms. "Sue me?" Karoline fired back, her tone cutting like a blade. "With what credibility? You're the one with a tape proving you're crooked, and a clerk who just sold you out. Good luck finding a judge who'll touch that mess." The right-wing contingent roared approval. "Get him, Karoline!" while the opposition shouted, "She's lying." A reporter yelled, "Order the tape played," adding fuel to the fire. Jennifer stepped between them, her voice icy. "Enough, Baxter. Move, or we'll move you." But Baxter wasn't backing down. "You're all in on it," he raged, pointing from Jennifer to Karoline. "This is a setup, a witch hunt. I've served this system for decades. You don't get to ruin me with some trumped-up garbage." He lunged toward the bench, grabbing the gavel like it could still save him. "Ruin you?" Karoline snapped, stepping closer despite Michael's hissed warning. "You ruined yourself when you started playing puppet for lobbyists. You're not a judge, you're a thug with a robe." The crowd split louder, cheers clashing with boos, a woman screaming, "She's right," while a man countered, "Shut her up." Jennifer's team moved in, one agent gripping Baxter's shoulder. "Hands off!" Baxter roared, wrenching free and slamming the gavel again. "I'm not some criminal you can drag out. Leavitt, you'll regret this. I'll bury you, you hear me? Bury you!" His voice cracked, desperation bleeding through, but Karoline didn't flinch. "Keep talking," she said, her words a dagger. "Every word's another nail in your coffin. You're finished." The gallery was pandemonium now, fists banging on seats, reporters shouting questions. "Is he under arrest? What's on the tape?" The right-wing bloc chanted her name louder, feeding off her defiance as the White House press secretary they'd rallied behind, while detractors yelled, "She's a disgrace!" Jennifer barked at her team, "Get him out, now!" Two agents seized Baxter's arms, pulling him back as he thrashed. "You can't do this," he screamed, his robe tangling as he fought. "I'll have your badges, and her head. You'll pay, Leavy. Mark my words." His threats echoed, wild and unhinged, even as the agents dragged him toward the door. Karoline stood tall, her voice rising over the chaos. "Pay? I'm not the one running scared. Face it, Baxter. You lost." The door slammed shut behind him, but the room didn't quiet. Justice for Karoline clashed with, "She's a liar," as fists flew between two spectators, forcing bailiffs to intervene. Michael grabbed her again. "Karoline, we're leaving. This is a riot." But she pulled free, facing the crowd. "Let them scream," she said, her tone unshaken. "I'm not hiding." Jennifer turned to her, her face hard. "You've got guts, Leavitt, but this isn't over. He's got friends. Powerful ones." Karoline met her gaze unflinching. "So do I," she replied, nodding toward the chanting supporters. "And I'm not afraid of a fight." The chaos swelled, voices overlapping, accusations flying. Baxter was gone, but his final threat lingered like a shadow, unsettling, real, and far from empty. Karoline had won the round, but the war was just heating up. The courtroom doors thudded shut behind Judge Leonard Baxter, his shouts fading as the federal agents dragged him away. The gallery's chaos sputtered out, replaced by a stunned hush. Karoline Leavitt stood at the plaintiff's table, her shoulders squared, expecting the weight of victory to settle in. The crowd's eyes, some hostile, some hopeful, fixed on her, waiting for her to claim the win. But Jennifer Brooks, the federal investigator, stepped forward, her expression grim. "Miss Leavitt," she said, her voice slicing through the silence, "that recording you brought? It's inadmissible. Illegal wiretap, no warrant. Your case is on thin ice. Might not even stand." The words hit like a sucker punch. Karoline's breath caught, her mind racing. "Inadmissible," she echoed, her tone sharp. "That tape proves he's corrupt. You heard it." Jennifer didn't flinch. "I heard it, but the law doesn't care. Rules are rules. Without it, you've got nothing solid." The gallery stirred, whispers turning to murmurs. A reporter shouted, "Karoline, is this true? No evidence?" Another chimed in, "What now, press secretary?" The question stung, flipping the narrative in an instant. Karoline's hands clenched into fists, but she kept her face steady. "Nothing solid?" she shot back at Jennifer loud enough for the room to hear. "He admitted it. Emily confirmed it. That's not nothing." Jennifer shook her head. "It's hearsay without the tape. You're dangling by a thread here." The crowd's silence broke. Some jeered, "She's toast," while others muttered, "They're protecting him." Michael Hensley grabbed her arm. "Karoline, we need to regroup now." She pulled free, turning to the throng. "I'm not done," she declared, her voice ringing out. "This isn't over. I'll keep fighting, tape or no tape. The truth doesn't vanish because you bury it." The right-wing supporters cheered faintly, but the tide had turned. Reporters swarmed as she pushed through the doors, their questions a relentless barrage. "Will you drop the case? Is Baxter off the hook?" She didn't answer, her steps firm despite the sinking feeling in her gut. Outside, rain lashed the Cincinnati streets, a cold, relentless downpour that soaked her blazer. Karoline stood alone, the courthouse's shadow looming behind her, its lights dimming in the storm. The crowd's noise faded, leaving only the hiss of water on pavement. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, cutting through the gloom. She pulled it out, the screen glowing with a text from an unknown number. "You thought you won? This is just the beginning." Her breath hitched, the words glowing like a threat carved in the dark. She scanned the empty street, rain streaking her vision, but no one was there, just shadows and uncertainty. Baxter was gone, but someone else was watching, waiting. Karoline pocketed the phone, her jaw tightening. Victory had slipped away, and something worse was coming. The fight wasn't over. It was evolving, and she was still in the crosshairs. If you've listened this far, you've surely picked up a lesson of your own. Karoline Leavitt's battle in that Cincinnati courtroom teaches us a stark truth. Power can collapse, but the fight for justice is never clean or certain. Her clash with Baxter shows that standing up, win or lose, exposes cracks even in the tallest towers. It's not about a perfect victory. It's about refusing to back down when everything's against you. In life, we face our own Baxters, bullies draped in authority. And this story reminds us to seek our own evidence, our own voice, even when the rain falls and shadows spread. Courage isn't a guarantee of success. It's the spark that keeps the fight alive. Thanks for joining me on this wild ride. Your thoughts fuel these stories. Drop a like if it hit home, comment your takeaway, and subscribe for more. What's your next move?